Matthew chapter 5, Jesus has this huge and wonderful crowd, hundreds and even thousands of people from all over the place. And he's looking at this crowd, and he goes up on top of this mountain, and when his disciples gathered to him, he begins to preach this sermon about his kingdom. And he begins with this elaborate introduction, this pocketbook guide for kingdom qualities, these necessary characteristics that as citizens need to have. And in past videos, we talked about 3 of them. We talked about those who are poor in spirit, those who mourn, and those who are meek. And then when we get to verse 6, he says, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled." And that's what we want to talk about in this video. And so to hunger and thirst, we've got to know how empty we are without God. Those are very strong words. He's not talking about the mid-morning hankering for some kind of snack. He's not talking about those who are vaguely interested in these things. He's talking about those who are starving to death. Somebody who's starving to death would do next to nothing to gain a little bit of food. That's the kind of desire that we need to have. And unfortunately, we often find ourselves feeling empty, but we fill it with snack foods, with things that don't have any nutrients. We grab the cotton candy. We want to climb the corporate ladder. We want to have our lives full of stuff around us. We want to excel at sports or video games or other activities. So what do? We invest lots of time and lots of energy into those things. And even Christians have fallen for this teaching that all they need is health, wealth, a full church. They need a fulfilling ministry or a happy family. But God says there's but one thing that will fill us up, and that is righteousness. And it's kind of hard to define what righteousness is in the context, but we're going to define it as everything that is right before God. Standing right before God. Living right before God. Doing and living the things that are right. And so Paul says there's but one thing he sought to attain in his life, and that was to know Christ and to attain to the righteousness that you do by doing that. And so Paul made tons of sacrifices. And he looked in his life and he eliminated anything that hindered him from doing that goal. And so do we long for righteousness? Maybe there's a few things we need to ask ourselves. Have we sought to eliminate that which is bad? Have we sought to eliminate sin in our lives? And that doesn't mean that you're never going to sin anymore, but you take up the fight against it. Have you eliminated worldliness in your lives? Are you trying to walk the line, the tight line between what is right and what is wrong? That's not hungering and thirsting for righteousness. Well, do you go to church? Some people say, well, a Christian doesn't need to go to church. Well, that's simply not true. We see in the Bible churches that are stirring one another up to love and good works and stirring up righteousness in their lives. And not just any church. We want a church that is worshiping and is functioning the way that God has instructed it in the Bible. Are we studying God's word? How much time are we spending in God's word? This is God's equipping and God's instruction in righteousness. Are we longing to know Christ, to know God deeper? Paul, who is thrown in prison in Philippians chapter 3, says the one thing he wants to do is he wants to know Christ. He's seeking to attain that. Do we have that longing for that? Are we longing for righteousness and things that are right before God? Jesus says that if we have that kind of desire, then he will fill us up.